On your Wednesday episode of Locked On Raptors, it's been 10 games now since Jakob Poeltl arrived in Toronto, and on today's show, we are going to dig into what we've learned about the Raptors in that 10-game period. Are the Raptors vastly improved enough to really justify this team going forward? What has Yak done to the team, and what has he meant? And also, what have all the other guys done in response to Jakob Poeltl's arrival? That's all coming up on today's episode with Katie Heinl of Dime and Basketball Feelings. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? Welcome to episode number 1355 of Locked On Raptors for Wednesday, March the 8th. I'm your host, Sean Woodley. I've been covering the Toronto Raptors now for 9 seasons on various platforms. You can find all of my work over on Twitter at WoodleySean. You can follow, subscribe to, rate, and review the podcast for free on your favorite podcast apps, all the usual suspects, Apple, Google, etc. And we are on YouTube. You can go watch the videos each and every day of Locked On Raptors. Look at my face, look at the faces of my guests, and all of that good stuff. Interact in the comments. We are pushing towards 3,000 subs on the YouTube channel. So thank you very, very much to all of those who have supported and helped to build up that subscriber base in our little Locked On Raptors family. All right, on today's show, the Toronto Raptors are now 10 games into the Jakob Poeltl experience. We're going to dig into the things we've learned, the things we hope to still learn by a season's end, and so much more with the wonderful Katie Heinl of Dime and Basketball Feelings, the New York freaking Times that still is not going to get old. I'm going to keep using that for a long time, Katie. Katie, how the hell are you?
Happy International Women's and Whatevs Wednesday. I'm good.
Yes, a very happy International Women's Day, to be sure. Today, I know, Katie's here, so it makes this podcast okay, but go and consume all of the wonderful Raptors content that is put out by the wonderful women who cover the Toronto Raptors. How about that, huh? Karina Mustafa, Chelsea Late, Kelsey O'Brien, Savannah Hamilton, all on down the list, Kayla Gray, The Shift, it's all amazing, and we are very, very lucky to have some incredible women covering the team. Katie, of course, you are very much in that group. Katie, let's talk about the Raptors, shall we? They have gone 6-4 since the arrival of Jakob Poeltl. Their offense is 22nd in the league, which has been a little bit of a sore spot, but they've had their moments. Of course, against the Nuggets, they look pretty damn good on that end. On the defensive side of the ball, things have been markedly improved, I'd say. They're 12th per NBA.com right now since the arrival of Jakob Poeltl on defense. In the last 2 weeks, they are 7th if you look at cleaning the glasses numbers, which is very promising. But let's begin just sort of what's like the biggest thing you think you've learned that we've learned as a collective Raptors watching fan base about the Raptors in these last 10 games? What comes to mind for you?
I think it's that things are in flux, and I will further explain that because I know that's a point that's just like, if it sounds fake, but there was a point in this season when like things were very stagnant for this team. Nothing was changing. The team was kind of dying for a change on multiple fronts. But now, like all the changes you've made, plus just this kind of like open opportunity for things to get markedly better from here. But like generally that this is a team that now has some options, I think has been the most striking thing to me, like whether that's rotational options, whether you've got some like depth options coming off the bench, just like, I think, like mood options. It doesn't have to be miserable, every night. I think you can see this team also have like tenacity options through. They are still, got to work on closing out games, but the fact that there are different gears now. So this is what I mean when I say we've got some flexibility. My new favorite website, Tankathon. Which I had to refer to for something I'm writing about the Raptors a bit earlier this morning. But, it tells you who's got the toughest schedule. And like 2 days ago, the Raptors were, or like a day ago, they were second. Like I think 2 days before that, they were first. Now they're sixth. But to me, the thing that strikes me, obviously that has to do with the games that are shifting and changing and all the other way that like teams are being ranked and playing throughout the season. But also I think for the Raptors, that's a markedly improved differential. Because it means that, as we saw against the Nuggets or a team like the Lakers, who are winning and playing pretty well right now, but like the Clippers, this next kind of batch of games don't seem as troublesome as they would have, a week, 2 weeks ago. Certainly if we're going back to like 2 months ago. But I think that sort of flexibility has been something that's really stuck out to me.
Yeah, I think, we've seen that manifested in like they've used multiple different lineups to close games and kind of based on the situation. What a delight that's been. Like, what? You could play more than the same five guys in the same, the same exact game plan and play style. What a revelation. Like you said, I think we've seen the rotations kind of find some, it's the weird thing in that there's all this change going on, but the one thing that seems to have kind of found some stasis and some, just reliability is the fact that you have like a deep rotation now. And that is where all those different options kind of are born out of. It's pretty fun. I think for me, Katie, as far as like things we've learned here, this is very much tied to the state of flux around the team and, the changing way in which they play. I do think we've learned that it's probably going to take a little time here for one guy in particular to kind of settle in, and that's Pascal Siakam. His numbers have been down over the last little while here. His efficiency's been a little bit off the last week or so, and I think that is very much tied to the team, for the better, changing the way they play. But it's putting, I think, the biggest onus on Pascal to kind of change what his habits have been throughout the season. Because you think back before Jakob Poeltl's arrival, more so, I think, into the first, the first half of the season before the turn to January, I would say, when Fred VanVleet kind of picked up his game. But for the most part this year, most good Raptors possessions on offense have flowed through Pascal Siakam or finished with Pascal Siakam, more often than not both. And it's a marked change to how the Raptors are playing, to not have him kind of be the engine for every single thing that they try to do on offense. And I think in the long haul, that's going to be a very good thing. It's diversity stylistically in your offense. It's not leaning on one guy to carry the burden for 82 freaking games like he's freaking Sisyphus. Like it's a good change, but in the short term, I think this is why you're seeing the offense maybe be the struggle point for the Raptors. It's a very different style of offense they're playing, a very different brand. And Pascal, I think, has kind of seen the biggest change. You want some numbers, Katie? I'll throw some numbers at you. Before Jakob Poeltl's arrival, Pascal Siakam had a 27.8 usage rate, 33.1 assist percentage, which was like one of the very best in the NBA. 83.3 touches per game, 5.1 minutes of minutes per game of actual possession with the ball in his hands. Yeah. Just a smidge behind Fred VanVleet in touches per game and time of possession, all that stuff. Since Jakob Poeltl's arrival, 26.5% usage, so down about a percentage point. 25.7 assist rate, so down about 8 percentage points. 74.4 touches, which is down about 9 touches per game, and about half a minute less of hard possession as well over the course of these games as well. As we see Fred VanVleet's touches go up, obviously the pick and roll action with Fred and Yak has been kind of the backbone of most good things that have happened for the Raptors on offense of late. Not surprising. It's a simple action. A lot of good stuff comes out of it. Jakob Poeltl never misses, and so it makes sense. But you have Pascal kind of playing now on the periphery of that type of action, and he's got to kind of relearn and figure out where his spots are in that orientation. Curious your thoughts, Katie, on the way Pascal has adapted or not adapted just yet to the way they're playing differently with Jakob in the lineup, and do you have any sort of long-term concerns about the fit, considering it's looked a little bit wonky here? Obviously, the three-point shooting is not a strength for this team. I think they can kind of get around it with their big-to-big passing, and the chemistry is obvious when you watch Yak and Siakam play together. They could probably run more pick and roll with those two, for example. Lots of different things they can do, but just general impressions of Pascal Siakam and how his game has changed and whether or not there's anything to worry about long-term, or if this is just a short-term adjustment that will mean long-term good times for the Raptors.
I don't think anything to worry about. I'm glad you brought up the pick and roll, because I think, that's something that we've seen Jakob be so complimentary to Fred with, especially given Fred's shooting numbers, and the hot and coldness of them this season. That's something I think that's lent to his playing, just like capabilities on the floor, but obviously his confidence, and then is lending like a nice offensive booster to the team, which they need at all times. So in the same vein, I think if Pascal and Poeltl could work on something like that, it won't look exactly the same, but I think that might be a way to ease Pascal into some possessions that he seems more comfortable with, because right now what strikes me is a soft regression is his like driving. It's like when he's trying to get to the basket and get to the rim, he's doing the thing of not finishing and kind of bailing out almost at the last minute. And this to me is stuff that he did 3 seasons ago. So I don't like that. I'm not necessarily worried. I think you've also got the difference of the spacing kind of around the rim has changed a little bit with Jakob. So if there's anyone you want to give leeway, and I think like leniency too, in terms of like the offensive fit alongside Jakob Poeltl, it is Pascal. Also just like his competency, his general IQ. Like those are also things that lend to me not being that concerned or stressed out. I also wouldn't be surprised if the coaching staff has kind of maybe not asked him to take a backseat, but to sort of like there's pairings that had to click first, which I think was notably Fred and Jakob. So, if he's just kind of watching and seeing where he fits, I don't mind that. I don't mind him like lurking more around the perimeter, like we've seen of Scotty and, Precious, because of what Jakob can do up close. But no, generally not really concerned. I think, this next stretch will be pretty telling. Yeah. Just in terms of opponents and the way that like the Lakers, Clippers, Nuggets, actually like the Wolves too, I think just with the size that they've got like around the basket will help in terms of like, Pascal, you got to get there. You got to pointedly finish what you started. Because ultimately like Poeltl's supposed to help with that. For sure. Right? He's going to box out and like be the post up kind of guy that you need to help out. So I think it'll get there. I think it's just gotta click a little bit more, as you said.
Yeah, look, the analogy I'll use a Locked On Raptors of lore, way back in the history of the annals of Locked On Raptors, an analogy here for you. Remember, Katie, we did a couple of specials where we read your wonderful classical Halloween stories and then turned them into like radio documentaries. Go listen to them. They're fantastic. The Phil Jackson one is an all-timer. The Tarzan Boy by Baltimore is still embedded into my brain in a way it will never be taken out. But when we did those shows, we would lay down a track of voiceover where we read the actual lines and the story and the dialogue. That's one track. And then you got to build it from there, right? And I think you're kind of seeing that with the Raptors offense, where they're basically starting from scratch with a blank audition page, and they're kind of layering in thing by thing. Yak and Fred as your pick and roll, backbone partnership, that's the first track. That's the voiceover track. And then as you get more time, which they don't have a ton of this year, to be fair, and might have to expend it to next season if they bring back a good majority of these guys, but you got to layer in the sound effects for creaking doors and potions in cauldrons, etc. Then you got to layer in Baltimore's Tarzan Boy various times throughout the show. Then you got to layer in all these other sort of sound effects, and eventually you get this full, beautiful project, which was one of the best things we've ever done on the podcast. Go listen to it again. It's awesome. It's only in audio form, but either way, that's, I think, what they're trying to get towards with the Raptors. They have the one bass track in there now, then they got to layer in all the other stuff to make that offense really sing and come together. And it just might take some time, and I think that's okay. Katie, we're going to come back on the other side. Don't want it to be the creaking door. That's the last. Those are some of the effects in that, by the way, are totally practical effects. Like I once recorded myself falling on the floor to get the sound of a tumbling sack going to the ground. You did. We did a lot of big commitment to that. Anyway, we're going to come back on the other side, Katie. Let people go and search up those old episodes of Locked On Raptors that, again, are only in audio form right now. Before we do that, however, got to tell you, we're going to get into some more things we've learned about the Raptors, by the way. But before we do that, should tell you about our brand new sponsor here at Locked On, and that is Ultimate Pro Basketball GM. This is very much a sponsor geared towards my interests. I love video games. I love games in which you can pretend to be a general manager of a sports team. I think we all love that. It's why we love the trade machine. And really excited about Ultimate Pro Basketball GM, the mobile game that makes it so you can live out your dream of becoming an NBA GM and managing your basketball franchise. You can do that in a really fun, intuitive, on-your-phone game, manage every strategic aspect of your game, play through the season, and lead your team to glory. You're responsible for hiring the right coaches and assistants, trading and training players, making draft picks, navigating your franchise through free agency and the draft, and all the ups and downs of a season. Sounds pretty darn fun to me. All in this in a challenging and realistic game world as well. Ultimate Pro Basketball GM is completely free and playable offline. Play on the go as you want and when you want to. And I'm having some fun with it. We got a little Locked On League going right now with all the other Locked On hosts. Anyway, I can take it to our pal John Corrales over at Locked On Celtics. I'm going to take advantage of that opportunity. Very much on the table with Pro Basketball GM, Ultimate Pro Basketball GM. That is. Locked On Raptors listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code Locked On in the game store. So go make sure you go check it out. To download the game, just visit probasketballgm.com. Scan the code on the screen right now if you're watching the video, or look it up at the app store. That's probasketballgm.com. Ultimate Basketball GM. Start your dynasty today. We continue on here with Katie Heinl, Locked On Raptors, team every day, all that good stuff. Let's get into it, Katie. What else have we learned about the Toronto Raptors, would you say? I will turn it again to you to come up with your thing number 2 that we have learned about your beloved Toronto Raptors.
I think it's good to face your problems and address them in terms of you had one. In a absent center role, you address that. You saw them. You've seen the improvements thus far. Though I will say, what I have also learned is that Jakob Poeltl doesn't fix everything, and there's still a lot of looming questions. I think notably they'll have to get to this offseason. But again, I think those what's more dire has become clearer. But generally, that things can change pretty quickly when a team starts winning, when you start generating momentum, when guys start feeling good again. And it's been nice to see. It's been really, really nice to see some, I want to say, repaired, but almost some, budding chemistry in places where we just didn't see it before.
Yeah, I think the idea that the Raptors kind of had going into the deadline, the front office's idea at least, of, hey, we've seen what this team is. We've identified the biggest issue this team has. We think there's enough here worth just getting a look to see if we can turn this thing around by addressing that big weakness that we've all kind of realized is the major glaring thing, the lack of a tall dude who can protect the rim and score around it. A novel concept in basketball, apparently. And look, you could certainly critique them for maybe being late to getting that addressed, in terms of just being too late in the game to really make a meaningful run at the 6th seed. The Nets won again last night. That dream is looking a little further off and distant by the day. And so you can quibble with the timing of it all, but I do think they have been proven correct in their assumption that you put a regular center in here, and this team is going to look a lot more like we all thought it would at the start of the season. I think if you were to kind of begin the season, play full 82 with Jakob Poeltl and this roster, you're probably going to end up where a lot of people hoped they would. You know what I mean? The Eastern Conference is pretty good, but maybe not as loaded and deep as we all thought. And I think you could argue that right now, on paper, the Raptors are probably the 6th best team in the Eastern Conference and have played like a playoff team since Jakob Poeltl came around. How the lack of a playoff spot and the play-in of it all, and just sort of the general free agency questions that loom going into the offseason change what the roster looks like next season still remains to be seen. But I do think the front office was bang on in their assumption that you put Jakob Poeltl in here and this team's going to make a whole lot more sense, even if not everything's fixed. We've seen the offense fall off a little bit. The defense, however, has gotten much better. Jakob Poeltl's defense actually has gotten much better as well compared to what it was in San Antonio. His defensive field goal percentage is, it was over 60%, 60.5 with the Spurs this year. He goes to the Raptors and he's at 55.4%, which is better than Miles Turner and better than Rudy Gobert in their season-long numbers. So really encouraging signs there, but certainly still a lot to be sorted out. I guess, let me ask you this, Katie. Is there Do you feel like we're any closer to knowing what the direction's going to be in the offseason? Like, obviously you have the 3 pending UFAs. There's the OG question as well, where his name was floated out at the deadline, and it seems like all sorts of teams wanted him but didn't quite want to pay the price. Maybe they get compelled to by a playoff loss. As I pointed out yesterday, he's pretty damn good at guarding Nikola Jokic. I wouldn't be surprised if a team that can't guard Nikola Jokic in the playoffs comes calling it draft time with all the stuff for OG. That's a question for another day. But, do you feel like we're any closer to kind of getting the vision of what next year's team is going to look like? How do you feel about Fred and Gary and Yak's sort of rolling and what that's going to be as the pending UFAs? I'm curious your thoughts there.
I don't think we're closer. I think if the trade deadline kind of proved anything, and just to borrow something that Masai Ujiri directly said himself, which is that it would be great if it was so easy, but situations like that kind of show you when your reality and expectations don't align with the team that you're either asking things of or trying to give things to, which was like, granted, the trade deadline is a pretty volatile time and a lot of teams were desperate to make moves. The offseason is a bit more measured, but I think these next 16 games for Toronto are going to be pretty telling, because if you go in and like you win the majority of them, you treat every game as its own individual matchup, almost like every game you would treat in like a playoff series, right? Then you're coming out, I think you're looking like a team. It's like, okay, we don't feel like it's so risky to kind of double down and reinvest in guys that have proven to be part of the core, maybe had a really rough start this season because we didn't have like some fundamental components in our lineup in place. But then you also have this looming question, which I honestly think the front office is going to use these next games to answer, which is this a team that has all season long underperformed, or has this been a team that's actually just played to its capabilities and the expectations were really outsized?
Right.
Because again, like I feel like I've been banging on this drama all season, but we didn't really have expectations set, I'd say, up until the trade deadline. And then at the trade deadline, it's like, oh shoot, we're in trouble. We need to set some kind of tone and like some kind of expectation of our guys that we have, because it's also, that doesn't lend a lot of clarity and direction in terms of roles on the team. So
yeah,
I think roles will get clarified if they do make it into, whether that's like I think a play-in situation is a bit more likely.
Yeah.
But if they make it into that, like, what are you looking at? 1 game, 2 games, getting into like a first series situation, that could change some things too, and also like feed some momentum back to the team. The Fred question, it's weird because like that to me seems like the one that's the biggest question mark. But then again, like you don't have a lot of guards of his ability potentially available. Trade guys can come up all the time. Someone can get disgruntled, but as it stands right now, Katie, there are 0 guys who are as good or better than Fred VanVleet who are going to be on the market this summer. So that's tough, right? And like, then I think, that is a situation where, are we just complaining because you've grown kind of used to something and somebody's pros as well as cons, and someone coming in is actually going to be markedly worse, right? So
grass not greener, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, exactly. Or like more readily available for somebody with his skills and capabilities, and also generally just his fit with the team, as much as that might have seemed strained at points this season. So I guess to answer your question, like, no, nothing. It's not necessarily clear. It will become, I think, clearer depending on where the team ends up.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. And on the Fred thing, I will say, I think if there is a guy we're closer to figuring out, like, the answer is to, like, will he or won't he be on the team next season, I do kind of think Fred might be the guy who's become a little bit more clarified. He's just been really good of late, and the playmaking from him with an actual big man who he hasn't gotten to play with since, like, Marc Gasol was a different kind of guy, right? He was more of a, wasn't like a pick and roll partner type. He was more of a run stuff from the elbows, shoot threes, etc., that type of stuff. It's like the first real pick and roll partner Fred VanVleet's gotten to play with since Jonas, and even then, that was like very, very early in Fred's career where he wasn't really being asked to be your regular pick and roll guy. It might be that he hasn't played with a pick and roll guy like this since the bench mob days when it was Jakob Poeltl who was his roll man, right? Like, and I think the clear fit with Yak, the value his shooting brings to the table. Like, as much as it's been off this season, the volume on its own is incredibly valuable. When they're falling, it's a total game changer. But when you work in the playmaking elements of it as well, he's averaging like 11 assists a game over his last 5. I think it was Will Liu cited yesterday on the Raptors show. He's averaging like 3 assists per game just to Yak alone in the last 5. Like, that's crazy. And I do kind of think it's coming a little bit more into focus here that Fred VanVleet should maybe just be the point guard for this team next season. And again, I know a lot of people have their misgivings about Fred, but sometimes you can't get the best player at his position for all of the positions. I would argue all the time you can't have that luxury. It's not a thing that's very easy to do. And Fred VanVleet, if he's the 12th best player at his position in the NBA, that's still pretty darn good and certainly worth keeping and hanging on to if you're not going to be able to get someone who's better than the 12th best point guard in the NBA. So I think if I've learned anything, it's that Fred VanVleet is good and important, which maybe is not something I needed to learn, but it's nice to have it refreshed in the brain. It's like reading an algebra book after you finish your last advanced function class and you're an adult just brushing up on your parabolas or whatever. I don't know. This analogy is losing steam. We're going to come back, Katie. Come back on the other side, dig into the final things we think we've learned about the Toronto Raptors over the last 10 games or so, and take a look ahead to the last 16. We'll get to that in just one sec. But first, got to tell you about our friends over at FanDuel, who are a wonderful website. They are the #1 sportsbook in America for a reason. It's a lot of fun, and new customers right now get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to points scored to threes drained and everything else in between. It doesn't just have to be basketball either. They got all the other sports and lines and props and odds and everything you want up there as well. Plus, with FanDuel, you can even combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. As I've said, I'm not much of a sports wagerer myself, but when I do decide to dabble, the same game parlay is the way to do it. I usually go and sort of get into it when I'm at a game itself, and I want to juice up the action while I'm sitting in the building. Always find that to be a pretty fun way to liven up the day, and FanDuel allows you to do that with that same game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go back to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA and Locked On. Please play responsibly. All right, we continue on here. Katie Heinl from Dime, Up Rocks. Wait, that's the same website. Dime, Basketball Feelings, the New York Times.
Sports, it's okay.
There you go.
Technically right.
All right, there we go. Learning stuff, Katie. We're learning stuff. We've learned stuff, I suppose, is the better way to frame it about the Toronto Raptors over the last 10 games. What else do you think we've learned? We've gone through a couple things here. The learning that the Pascal Siakam adjustment period is going to take some time, that there is some new versatility to the way they play, that Jakob Poeltl's fixed a lot, but not all. What else do you think we have learned about the Toronto Raptors since the arrival of one Jakob Poeltl?
I think we've learned that this is a team that can still punch up, and still seems to really flourish when they're playing against better teams. That definitely was very notable in that Nuggets game. I did not expect them to come out, swinging in the way that they did. And also just like really digging in and trying to stay in the way that game ended. I know you've already talked about it, but it was really a bummer.
Stunk, kind of Katie. It stunk.
No, a good rule for a team that's not really going to get favorable whistles, and for young guys like Scotty Barnes. Though I will say that was like no fault of his own. That was Scott Foster's ego. But to not look for calls because you're not going to get them. And
that's probably fair
to expect them. Anyway, that said, so I'm actually really looking forward to this next 5-game stretch. They're the only team kind of in this jostling position they are in the East right now. Every team trying to make the play-in who has such a concentrated West Coast trip. So it's going to be challenging, but I also think it could be a really valuable slingshot for them to get on up out of there and like stop being stuck shoulder to shoulder with like the Hawks, the Heat, the Pacers, the Wizards. Like give yourself a boost, secure some postseason. What was I going to say? just like direction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Reps, postseason reps. It's
Yeah,
good stuff.
exactly.
Yeah.
So, but I like that because honestly, less than months ago, I would have thought like, and it did look like this was a team whose fight had really gone out of them. Didn't really matter. Like they were almost playing with relief, like kind of a shrugging relief to teams much worse than them, but we're also still losing to teams much worse than them. But now it's nice to just see them have that kind of confidence boost, right? And again, I do think some of that comes with treating every game like its own matchup. Like the next Nuggets game is going to look wholly different. I already know from what the most recent one did, but I think this is good. It's like, it's nice to look forward to these kind of matchups again.
Yeah, I think like that's one of the bigger things we've learned is that the Raptors are fun again, in a way that they were not at all going into the deadline. Like extremely just like grim situation it felt like. And I do think, we've a couple things I think on top of all the stuff we've talked about here that we've kind of learned. I think one, we've got some reaffirmation that Nick Nurse knows what he's doing. I know it's not been perfect. I know there's been some weird rotations at times, but like he's pressed a lot of the right buttons over the last little while here, using Jakob Poeltl effectively, knowing when to use him in closing situations versus when to go small. I think he's done a pretty damn good job kind of getting this team reoriented in pretty short order when that was a necessity, right? Not a lot of time here to figure things out. And it already feels like they've got some sort of stability and dependability as to what's going to happen each night. Not always going to lead to results, but they have at least sort of like a cohesive game plan and, guys who they can trust to play in certain spots of games, bench lineups that are starting to really kind of percolate and look like something might be there. That's been really nice to see. And, with all of that, I do think I've been kind of, I felt this way for the most part. Like I always kind of thought there was a good team in here somewhere and they were more so playing poorly than just actually straight up bad. I think that's been probably, obviously Yak changes the dynamics and makes them a lot more potent, but I think that's probably been proven to be a little bit true. And I think that I think now there's like a clear direction to build from here if you decide to keep most or all of these guys, which I would assume is going to happen. Like there's an upward trajectory that can be taken by this team. This is not a team that you can just, say is going to sit on the conveyor belt of being 8th place every year. Like there's upward mobility. Scotty Barnes is a big part of that, obviously. And just like more cohesion, more time and reps spent together, there's going to be something to build upon here. And that's to me like what I want out of my fandom experience. I know everyone's like, titles now, give me the titles, contender. I don't care about that, really. I want to see a team build something from the ground up or from wherever they start into something better. And I think that is now an avenue I can see for the Raptors in a way I maybe didn't before Jakob Poeltl arrived back in town. Do you agree there? Am I way too rose-colored glasses-y here? Or is there something here that's kind of like the roots, the foundation of something that can grow into something much more in the next 2-3 years to come, presuming most of these guys are around?
I think there is but I think it really depends on how the team, again, like to go back to like how the team's going to play through this next stretch is going to determine whether they're at the precipice, I think, of what you're saying of like something greater, or if they're at a crossroads and they're going to have to cut ties with some people, and really like redetermine, in which case you're probably not looking at like a real great next season. You're looking more for continuity, but I don't think you're wrong in that, this team has always had some really great core parts of it. And those those fundamental people have not changed. And they will continue to get, somebody like Scotty Barnes, Precious Achiuwa, even Pascal and OG, like they're going to continue to get better. Those are facts, whether that's with the Raptors or not, those are facts. So I think you want to hedge your bets on retaining the people who are going to get better if you can. I was going to say who are going to be the best at getting better, but I feel like we reached the end of the the show.
Yeah, obviously there's still a lot to be determined. The offseason, like the Raptors have put themselves in a position where they have a very tight needle to thread, and it could blow up in their faces spectacularly if they don't manage this right. But I've tried to all season long think about the 2013 through 2015 stretch for the Raptors, right? And, I kind of have compared last season a lot to that 2013-14 year where they really go on a late surge and it becomes this like super fun, rollicking team and everyone's very excited and they lose in the playoffs and kind of learn a little bit along the way that they're just not quite there. And this year is not going to finish with a top 4 seed and home court in the playoffs, but I do think a sweep to the Wizards and whatever the hell this season has been so far and however it's going to end, pretty comparable in terms of like things that could make you really change your franchise's direction if you really wanted to go that way. And they were proven, I think, correct in not blowing things up after the sweep to the Wizards and believing in the power of patience and building from within and building a culture and sort of, again, kind of layering in competence year over year over year to the point where you're a perennial, very good team. And that, I think, is kind of the end goal it should be the end goal for most franchises, is get to the point where you're a perennial, very good team. And that puts you in the position where you can strike if a trade becomes available or weird stuff happens in your conference and there opens up a pathway to a conference finals or a finals. That, to me, is like the way more tried and true way to build a legitimate team as opposed to just selling out entirely to try to get one of the 5 best players in the league in the draft by happenstance. And I think that's now very much back on the table with the way these last 10 games have gone and just the glimpses we've seen. It's not going to be a finished product by the end of this season. I can promise you that. The offense is probably going to drag them down quite a bit. The defense is going to have to carry their asses on some nights. But like there's something here. And if you told me that we're looking at this team coming in next year and maybe adding someone in the offseason, you don't forget Otto Porter Jr. potentially coming back next year as well. If you told me this team goes and wins 54 games next season and kind of replicates what they did in 2015-16, where they were one of the darlings of the Eastern Conference and that was one of the most fun seasons you'll ever have, I wouldn't be shocked by that. It takes a lot. The Eastern Conference is very good. There's a lot of really good teams. It's not just one LeBron-led team that's kind of owning the conference. There are 2 or 3 monsters up there, but things change. The Sixers could be nothing by this time next year. They're probably going to bow out in glorious fashion in the playoffs, and what that's going to mean, who the hell knows? I think there's the pathway here for that sort of year-over-year incremental growth and sort of adding to your competency and your equity as a potential contender and all of that. And I think that, to me, has been one of the bigger takeaways from the last 10 games or so. Maybe I'm far too optimistic, Katie. I would not be the first time that's happened on this here podcast, but that's how I feel. Any parting shots, Katie, before we round out this show?
Nope.
Awesome. Right on. What can people look for from you in terms of all of your wonderful writing and other work?
Well, as I alluded to earlier, I will have something that I wrote about the Raptors actually on this next stretch of the season, probably out later today on Gaming Society. So you can look for it there.
Awesome. Basketball feelings as well. It's the very best. Can't recommend subscribing enough. And I'm a paid subscriber. It's well worth your money. Go do it, all right? We'll wrap it there. Thank you so much for tuning in. Go make your second listen of the day. Locked On Leafs as the Buds had a nice win last night over New Jersey. They're looking good. Mitch Marner scoring dangling goals. They got some injury issues. Mike and Dave over there on Locked On Leafs are breaking it all down for you and giving you that daily dose of Leafs information and analysis that you come to know and love from our Locked On family. And thank you so much, as always, for supporting this show. Subscribe, rate, review, all that good stuff. It's always appreciated when you do that. We'll talk to you again tomorrow as Jamar Hines will be along to break down Raptors-Clippers. Should be a fun one, unless the Clippers decide to not play any of their guys, which they're very much liable to do. Either way, we'll break it down tomorrow with Jamar. Thanks so much for hanging. Bye-bye.